can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Okay. And they're like, no, but where are you really from? And then I say, I was born and raised in Burley. No, but where are you from? My roots are from Mexico. And I understand what they're asking. And on the contrary, I'll have some people who ask me that same question, where are you from? And when I say from Mexico, they will ask, no, but really, where are you from? So it is a difficult question to ask someone that has a diverse background. There's a lot of beauty in it, but I often feel like I'm either here or I'm either from here or from there. But I was born and raised in Burley, Idaho. My roots are from Mexico, from the state of Jalisco. And both of my parents taught us the importance of our tradition, our culture, and our language. And that's a little where I'm from. So I'm going to be talking about the bilingual liturgy from a U.S. Latino perspective. I might be using the word Latino, Latina, and Hispanic interchangeably. Right here we have an image of Our Lady of Guadalupe celebration, which took place in December of 2013. Several of you attended, and it was an amazing experience. We had about 800 people, and we hope to offer it next year. But I just wanted to start off with something that we did here bilingually in our diocese. Our next slide we have, what do you think about bilingual liturgies? Oftentimes some of our fellow priests are either eliminating liturgy to eliminate the need for an additional mass and don't want to become bogged down in trying to navigate several things. But there's a few things to consider, 3 central questions, concerns to consider before implementing a bilingual liturgy in your parish. One is the simple pastoral tool to achieve unity between the Anglo and Latino communities. A bilingual liturgy can be done, it can be done effectively, and it can be an opportunity to integrate multiple backgrounds in one gathering. And one obvious place that we have been doing it is here in Convocation. Also, the best home for bilingual worship is in its celebration among bilingual people. Oftentimes, bilingual people they understand English and Spanish, so it doesn't seem so maybe long. We can easily switch back and forth. Oftentimes, for only the English-speaking or the Spanish-speaking person, it can be more challenging to have to sift through listening to both of the languages. And bilingual liturgy should be the exception, not the rule. Some exceptions could include Good Friday, Convocation. Multicultural or bicultural liturgy. This is something that I pulled out from Father Alan Deck. It says multiculturalism becomes a pastoral methodology. It obscures the serious pastoral need to relate specifically to each and every culture. Again, terminology can be and is important. Do we say it's a multicultural? Do we say it's bicultural? It can be very confusing. And when we talk about bicultural, we honor the 2 distinctive cultures. And it's not necessarily a combination of everything, of everyone, if we're specifically talking about an English and a Spanish-speaking, or primarily English and Spanish-speaking parish who is trying to do a bilingual culture. So we're honoring the specific uniqueness of each culture when we talk about a bilingual or bicultural liturgy. Now, there is some resistance with bilingual liturgy and the ecclesial unity, which makes complete sense if we're talking in the context of the U.S. history. If we look at our social and historical reasons, we think about the separation that happened in the schools back in 1896. We had the Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. And 85 years later, we have the Brown versus Board of Education, which overturned the Plessy versus Ferguson. So I have heard from some people saying, why are we going to create a bigger division within our parish? Our country has suffered that, and now we're going to say in our parish that it's okay to have a further separation. We'll go more into the detail of some of those specifics. But it is important to be mindful of our social and our historical background in the U.S. and how that can cause some tension or some questioning when someone is trying to create a unity and not a division. And here are some reasons of why we should not do bilingual masses. The missiology practices of the church, cultural and linguistic segregation is necessary for the proper enculturation of the gospel. Less the function of the church to facilitate the process of enculturation than it is for the church to provide the faithful and enculturation pastoral ministry in their own language and culture. When we have the opportunity to celebrate Mass in the culture that we were born and raised with, it helps us when things are adapted. It helps us become closer to God, to that salvific thing that Vince was talking about and Tish talked about as well. And if we're doing a bilingual liturgy just to avoid having to do two masses, some problems can arise if you have someone that is not familiar with only the Anglo-speaking rubrics or the Spanish-speaking traditions, not rubrics, but the traditions that each culture carries. So it is important to honor where everyone is coming from. And there is an appropriate place to do bilingual masses. I will not dismiss that. We'll talk more about that. The pastoral approach of Latino community, I already talked about. If we can resist the process of acculturation and thinking we all have to be one, we are all the same, that will help. And I think of just Pentecostal Sunday. We were all given the same spirit, different gifts, same type of reality that we are experiencing in our parish as well. If our focus can be on each human particularity and what each unique person offers, it helps us feel welcome. It helps us be part of a local church and the bigger church as well. And then our outcome, if we can have that as our focus, our outcome can be our human response and faith bounded by our culture. Again, focusing back on the importance of our culture, being able to celebrate it, it makes us be part, it will allow us to be part of the local and the bigger church. And what unites us as Christians and defines our ecclesial Catholicity? Not uniformity in worship, but rather the capacity of the church to assume the particularity of the world's varying languages and cultures and a common praise of God. And the communion of one baptismal faith that must be lived, expressed, and celebrated in particularity of the language and culture. So on this second image, can anyone give me some guesses on what it might be, the bottom one? It's a procession, yes. It's a procession, it's a Good Friday procession. It's very common in the Latino community on Good Friday. When I was in Boston, we got to do a procession, and it wasn't done inside the church. It was done out in the barrios, out in the neighborhoods, where we had to go, we went walking. And all of our prayer was focused, all of the stations were focused on the community's realities, whether it was injustice, immigration, education. And the Hispanic culture is lived and expressed. It's a daily thing. It's something active. It's something we can live. I often think of Roberto Goizueta. He has a book called Caminemos con Jesús. And if you ever get a chance, I highly recommend it. He talks a lot about our God isn't only on the statue. Our God is the living God. Every day, we experience God through the vida cotidiana, our everyday life. Going back to our bilingual liturgy, there is a reality of code switching and why it's so easy for us. And we have the image of the squirrel jumping back and forth. And that's how we do it. That's when someone knows 2 or more languages, it's easy for us to switch back and forth. Oftentimes I'm in a conversation with someone and I can't think of a word. For example, godparents. Sometimes I think of padrinos and I say padrinos. Or we can have a long conversation in English and then we cannot find a word that perfectly describes what we're saying, so we switch back to Spanish. And they have some of the reasons of why this is done. Language proficiency, we can't find the word. Failure of memory, I can't think of it in Spanish, but I know it in English and vice versa. Facilitation of communication and social and political factors. Another reason that has also been brought up is secrets. If you need to say something, you could say it in another language. Just be careful though, more people are knowing another language. Also, one thing that is very interesting about the code switching, particularly in the US, is that we are so close to the border country of Mexico and Latin Americas, which then allows that, because of our geographical proximity of the countries of origin, the continuous influx of large numbers of immigrants from Hispanic countries, it makes it easy for us to continue holding our Spanish-speaking language versus if we were somewhere in a different country across the sea. Oh, thank you. Also, code switching is the language in the vernacular of the bilingual and bicultural person. Thus, it's celebrated among bilingual and bicultural people. The code switching liturgy is an enculturated liturgical text in the vernacular of the assembly, so bilingual liturgy should be used for bicultural. What is the virtue of biculturally welcoming liturgical and devotional life in parish? If liturgical texts do not reflect the cultural context of the assembly, they lose intelligibility. Thus, experience of bicultural versus the monolingual culture. And again, it was interesting when Tish and I were working on our presentations, we gathered and we both she had the image of Our Lady of Enoch and Our Lady of Guadalupe, and then I had this one. So without even knowing, we already had that same feeling of being able to present Mary in a different way. Not that it's just unique to each culture. And I must say that my image that I always had was always this image of white God, white Jesus, because that was the only thing that I was brought up with, to be quite honest. But as I began to explore, I thought, why not? Why not? Why can't my God look like the color that I am? Why is that not possible? So I just found it interesting to think of the different cultures and how they have their image of Jesus. And that's why it's so important that if we can have an image be present, in our parish, that we can do it, specifically if we have a group of diverse population in our parish. Again, acknowledging that form plus matter is important. Our words, the bread and the wine. Also, word-driven nature of the Roman rites. It impedes full participation in the liturgy. And best home for bilingual liturgical text is in its celebration and assembly of bilingual people. I keep repeating that over and over, just because there is an importance of recognizing that when you have a bilingual liturgy, it can be done effectively with bilingual people. Here we have the bilingual liturgy and experience of exile. Oftentimes when we come to the States, we have to leave everything. We go to a foreign country, we leave our language, our food, our culture, everything that we have known. Sometimes we didn't have the choice of coming here. We were either forced to come or we came to seek better opportunities for our families as far as education, as economic stability. So I put a couple of images here describing, what we're leaving here. In the streets of Mexico, it is so common to see puestos or to see stands of food. Anywhere and everywhere, there is always food. You have fresh fruit, tacos, tortas, and you can see the difference here. This is here in Boise, in the downtown mall. You don't necessarily see a lot of people with food stands outside here in Boise. It does happen, but it's not something in the everyday life, so we can see a difference. Here we also have people who are in Mexico. This is in Mexico, who are outside of the common area. This is our common area in downtown Boise. Again, looks a little different. And I put two images of two people that were very popular. Some of you might recognize this gentleman down here. I don't remember if I was born in that era, but I've heard about him, Elvis Presley, and then we have Vicente Fernandez. Again, two distinct realities, two different people. Even the way that we hug, up on the front, the Latinos love to hug, we love to be together. And it was when I was looking online for an image of an English-speaking people hugging, I must say that it was very difficult to find. This was something, I tried to get something close, but the first page, when I was trying to find an image of a Hispanic hugging, I got hundreds of images. So hugging and affection is very important as well. And now I'm going to show a quick video of how being a Mexican American can be exhausting. Again, this is an opportunity for us to reflect on how to be aware, how to have, be aware of the different people that come through our parish and where they may be coming from. What is their reality? Where is their story? And how to better meet their needs. Here in the States, a very popular singer back in the 90s, and she said, okay, now I want to go to Mexico and go venture over there. And her dad's like, no, you cannot do that. It's not that easy. It's very difficult. And he talks about how it can be exhausting, how we have to know about, what was that? Oh yeah, just exactly the same thing that I was talking about, knowing about Elvis Presley, knowing about all of our presidents from the U.S. and not being American enough, knowing about all of our presidents from Mexico and not being Mexican enough. That is my reality right now too. I have to know about the history of Mexico, the history of the U.S., and I'm still not considered American enough, and I'm still not considered Mexican enough. When I go to Mexico, they don't see me as someone from Mexico. They say, oh, the girl from El Norte, the person from the northern part of the country. And when I'm here in the U.S., no one considers, I won't say no, but there are people who wouldn't necessarily consider me American. They're like, no, you're from the other side of the country. So it is very exhausting, but there is also a blessing to be able to navigate both cultures. I can personally say that. When you can understand and appreciate your culture, it's easier to share that with others. When I've had opportunities to do that, and I enjoy it. Before, when I was younger, I grew up in a predominantly Mormon little town, Burley, and I remember thinking, I wish my family was white. I wish we were white. I wish, I just had this perfect image. But as I began to understand my culture, my language, my tradition, and the importance of it, it changed. And being able to navigate two cultures is it's a beautiful thing. I enjoy it with all the challenges that I have. Okay, we can skip that one. So here we talk about the theology of mixture and otherness, a hermeneutics of otherness and engagement. If we focus on the otherness, for example, myself, I'm of another person. I can live in this bubble of being oppressed and saying, well, no one likes me, no one appreciates me, I'm not too American enough, I'm not too Mexican enough. I have that option of creating that in my mind and living in this constant oppression. Living in this constant oppression also allows me, or can allow me, to also be an oppressor. The oppressed oppressing. So I can stay in that bubble. Maybe many of you know of people who are in that bubble or have been in that bubble where we are constantly the victims. But if we can seek beyond that and think, okay, yes, this is our reality, but we can achieve liberation through that. And when it is achieved from such a voice emerges a profound commitment not to overwhelm or override the other, but rather to acknowledge it, value it, and engage it. And I think I spoke about that, just being able to navigate both cultures, that there is this liberation when you can get there. But it did take me. I remember thinking when I was young, I wish I was white complected, and that I came from a different background, thinking that the majority, the dominant culture was a better culture to be in. But you know what? I was born and raised Hispanic, or I don't even know to consider myself Hispanic American, and that is a blessing in itself, and it is liberating. This particular parish, I got to go visit it. It was in Sacred Heart Church in Camden, Mississippi. About 3 years ago, I went on an initiative for emerging leaders in the U.S. There were leaders from mission diocese and non-mission diocese, and it was an amazing experience. We went to this parish, and they had a gospel night on Fridays, and they would invite people of all different congregations to go, and they would sing, and they would spend like 1 hour and a half just praising God. The different denominations entered into one place, and we got to experience that at a Catholic church. It was so awesome. So this image right here of Jesus was there in Camden, Mississippi, and they would alternate different congregations. And also on that same note, God's solidarity is liberating because it authenticates their identity and experience. A quote that I pulled out was, "Black people have been humiliated and oppressed by the structures of white society 6 days of the week, gather together each Sunday morning in order to experience another definition of humanity. The transition from Saturday to Sunday is not just a chronological change from the 7th to the first day of the week. It is rather a rupture in time, a kairos event which produces a radical transformation in the people's identity." And that was the same thing that I witnessed there in Camden, Mississippi. They talked about the racial discrimination that they constantly lived and are living right now as we speak. And they say that when they gather, if it's on Sunday, when they gather for Mass, it is a liberation. So just being able to experience liturgy together when you are in a constant oppression can be helpful. We find our identity. And going back to our bilingual liturgy, it's a place in which the dislocating reality of otherness is transformed into an immediate and eschatological experience of liberation. And 2 reasons for offering bilingual Mass or monolingual cultures should be for offering hospitality and practical necessity. Talking about Convocation, this would be a perfect reason why we do offering hospitality. And by exception, the bilingual liturgy and the exception should be the bilingual liturgy and monolingual congregations. In order for the bilingual liturgy to be authentic, it should be celebrated, should be a celebration of shared baptismal faith. 4 factors to facilitate monolingual assemblies participation in bilingual worship. So when we are getting ready to prepare for our bilingual worship, here are 4 things to consider. Number 1 is makeup of the planning team must have equal representation of both communities. It cannot be truly bilingual if we're only taking the dominant culture, we're only taking the dominant culture to plan everything. To truly be bilingual is to involve people from both communities in the planning part, in the decision-making part. It's not us or the dominant culture making decisions for everyone else, but it's inviting people to be on the table to make that decision together. Also, allowing nonverbal communication to speak louder than the verbal communication. Using a printed program with translations, several parishes do this, and use of antiphonal music and singing the parts of the Mass in Latin and Greek. We got to experience that yesterday in our prayer, which was beautiful. So these are 4 factors to consider when you're going to prepare for bilingual liturgy. And that's... Yes?
With your last statement, you did away with the bilingual liturgy. You now have a 4-language liturgy.
I'm sorry,
Use of music in Latin and Greek, you now added 2 languages. So now you no longer have a bilingual liturgy, you have 4-language liturgy.
One thing that I was going to say, I'll just say it anyway, is, and I'm saying it because I do liturgy for the diocese, the makeup of the planning team must have equal representation of both communities, but what should you start with? Not the planning team, but what? No? It's a lovely thought though. Deacon Johnson, pastor, where do you start to plan any liturgy? Deacon Richard Cullen, what do I tell your students?
With the ritual itself.
With the book, that's right. Any liturgy, begin with the ritual book.
And then for our last slide, we just have a list of resources available at our DPC Center if people want to know more about how to integrate bilingual masses effectively in their parishes. Here are a few books, and actually the Hispanic ministry in the 21st century, present and future. We are selling it here by Dr. and it was published, edited by Dr. Hospital Espino, who will be our guest speaker for the next 2 days. He'll be coming in tomorrow. It's a great tool. And then also the USCCB and Tish and myself, you can always contact us. And working in the Hispanic, in the Office of Cultural Ministries, we do get a few questions, we ask Tish about them. But also, yes we do. And I just want to be able to share that we are here to help you in your parish. We don't want you to feel frustrated if you don't feel that you have to do this alone. I personally would like to help in any way possible if there's an opportunity, and also using the resources that we have at our parish. I've extended whatever we can do at our office, but know that you can always contact us. We are here to support you. We are here to support every effort that you do. And we want to thank all of our priests for celebrating bilingual masses, for being present to the people, for being present for everything that you do, for the deacons as well, for helping us, and for all of the lay ministers, catechists, youth and adult ministers, administration, for welcoming the people every time they come into the office. You have a really big job. So thank you for everything that you do at your local parish. It's beautiful to see that you took time. We all have commitments, and for some people, this wasn't necessarily a big commitment, but we thank you for being here with us at our Convocation on the Summit on Hispanic Ministry. We will be able to answer other questions that arose from either our presentation. Do we still have time?
Oh, we do. Okay. So are there any questions or statements anyone wants to make or clarity on? Yes, in the back? Okay.
I just wanted to add a little bit of a different perspective to the idea of multicultural ministry in that we are a multicultural family. We have an African daughter, and we have also experienced the Hispanic ministry much more with Max serving as a deacon in the Hispanic community. And so we don't have bilingual services each Sunday, but we have we have the English and we have the Spanish Mass because we have the resources for that. But I think that we are culturally enriched by bringing the experiences back and forth between the communities. So, for example, it happened that I attended the Spanish Mass on a Feast of the Presentation, which is not a big event necessarily in Anglo culture. It was amazing in that many of the people brought forth their baby Jesuses to be blessed. So Mac was serving, and I was in the pews with our daughter, who has still not forgiven me for not bringing her baby to church that day because she wanted so much to participate in that. And she didn't care which culture it was. It made a richer experience for her. And so to see that, and then to share that story with people in our Anglo community, that touched them, to be able to share that experience. So even when we have bilingual services, sometimes it takes longer, but to explain some of the tradition, both from the Anglo to the Hispanic community and from the Hispanic community to the Anglo, it makes a richer experience for all of us. It reminds us that we're a worldwide church. And we see that firsthand with our daughter in trying to broaden her experience of church beyond what we do.
Thank you. Monsignor, you have one?
I was going to ask, from your perspective as a person, you started out your talk and Tish you were talking about Hispanic or Latino back and forth. You said you would, you did, but I can remember years ago, it used to be a big deal because of the Puerto Ricans, for example, they prefer one of Spanish speaking. In other words, from your point of view, what you prefer? Any comments on that?
That's a great question. A lot of people ask, what do you prefer to do? We're talking about being called Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Puerto Rican, Mexican. My first response is if you're not sure, always ask. Always ask, and that will be the safe way to take it. How do you prefer that I refer you, you and your background? The term Hispanic came from the United States, and it lumped a lot of people from Mexico. But if you are from Central or South America, you won't necessarily like to be referred as a Mexican. Same thing with Latino. Personally, I consider if you're Latino, you can't be from Mexico, Central and South America, including the Caribbeans, Puerto Rico, Cuba. But other people could argue with me too. So we can go on for hours talking about those differences, but it is important. I just met a Puerto Riqueño this weekend, and I asked him, how do you like people to refer you to? And he's like, I am a Puerto Riqueño, and what did he say? We like the word, there was a specific word. He's like, you won't go wrong with it. He's like, but never call me a Cuban. That is one word that I will be offended with. He's like, you can even, if someone forgets and they call me a Mexican, I'm okay. But a Cuban, you do not call me a Cuban. He's like, the same thing with the Cubans. You do not call Cubans Puerto Riqueños. A lot of it goes back to the history of the tension. So it is important just to ask people what they feel comfortable. I'm okay with being referred to as a Mexican Latina. My mom, for example, she likes to be referred to as a Chicana. And there's a lot of people who don't read. And that's a generational difference as well. A lot of people don't like to be referred using that term Chicano, because there was a big movement behind that as well. So every generation might give you a different response. Safest thing is to ask what they feel comfortable with.
I think that's why the point that Tish brought up about ritual is so important. Because if ritual, as is written, is fallen, of course you have the variances for the different cultures, that's uniting. The parish I'm in, when I came in, there was one set of rules for the Spanish masses in terms of lectors, Eucharistic ministers, readers, all that, and the English. And it boiled down to the Spanish side was completely disorganized, because I think the mentality was, let them do it their own cultural way, instead of actually showing them what the ritual says. And so I think there's a fear of stepping on people's toes when you talk about ritual as it is expressed in the Roman Rite, because you're gonna squash their culture, you're gonna offend, but it's very liberating. And people like to be taught, I think whether you're Mexican or Guatemalteca or whatever, what the ritual actually says and how to celebrate the Mass, and how to then incorporate culture into it. But if culture comes first, and I think that's the common practice, you get disorganization, you get division, because even within Mexico, in my parish, I try this all the time, I love to do this. I ask people, well, how are marriages celebrated in Mexico? How is the Day of the Dead celebrated in Mexico? How is the Quinceañera celebrated? Well, if you're from northern Mexico, central Mexico, southern Mexico, eastern, western, it's different. There is no Mexican way. And to blanket all as Mexican is a big mistake. So ritual has a very unifying, a very consoling, and a very comforting effect.
I think that's true, and I think that a point that I would make too is that when you go to a parish, to the Spanish Mass, and it's completely different than your expectation, you may be correct in saying, this is a community where culture came first. I guarantee you that community will not see it that way. That's just how they pray. That's just their practice. Now, I can see, and I totally agree with you. I think ritual is where you start. And the fact is, those ritual books are pretty bare bones. For as old as those rituals are, and as much as involved, because they're not talking about that. They're talking about the ritual theology. And you get into it, and then you go back and you find the rationale behind it. But I don't think you would find some 80-year-old person, 60, 20, whatever, this is just how we pray. This is just how we do Mass. It's not because, we're enshrining our culture. It's because this is what we've done in this community for, it could even only be 20 years. And as you know, 20 years is a long time in the memory of any parish. So I agree with you. I think that the response should always be the same. And I don't think, I'm not necessarily sure the impulse comes from a desire to enshrine the culture. It's just they have enshrined the culture in their practices. That's what happens. Liturgical practices it's, just because I wanted to start a big controversy, the whole holding hands thing at Mass. That is, enshrine is not even the word. And it's not really that old of a practice. So, does that make sense? No, I really do, and I think that it's unfortunate that priests don't have more time, because you do a disservice to people when you don't show them the ritual, you don't catechize, you don't explain to them.
I wasn't speaking about not allowing culture to take its place, because it
Right.
will. I was speaking about when you don't care enough to teach the ritual,
Right.
and then allow culture into that.
And I do think, I know that it's not that you don't care personally. I think a lot of times it's because you have no time. And you personally, I know, make that time. I do understand that. But that is a challenge, I agree. So, anything else? Father Boniface?
Kind of in the planning sessions for this particular piece, there was some discussion originally about moving towards some, not lockstep, doing everything the same, but more uniformity in terms of liturgical practice.
Right. Did everybody hear that? Father
Is
Bonus?
that-
Yes. He mentioned that in the discussion prior to this workshop, there was talk about, as a diocese, having a more uniform approach to sacramental preparation in particular, and then sacramental practices. And that is going to come up tomorrow when we talk about our the results of the convocation. What was interesting to me about that, and I think you and I talked about this, that was universally the appeal. As the liturgy person for the diocese, I knew I heard that a lot from Anglo parishes and communities. And then when I started going around and talking to the Hispanic communities, it was the same thing. What we want are guidelines that are the same for every parish for sacramental preparation. And I was talking to Christy, and Christy's had the same experience from the other end. I thought that was just a Latino thing. I said, no, I thought it was just an Anglo thing. Turns out it's a diocese thing. We all want it, and we know we need it. So that'll come up tomorrow, and of course that's going to be affected by a new bishop. But it's definitely one of the things that we are going to hand to whoever comes forward. This is what we want as a diocese. This is what we need out of respect to the people who asked for it. So. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Mr. Hannah,